Welcome to Gotta Run. This is Will Sanchez. Thank you for tuning in. My special guest today is Evan Siegfried. He is a member of the Dashing Whippets. I loved his bio where he states, I live in New York with my dog, Rowdy. Indeed, he and Rowdy have done the doggy dash. However, he may be more recognizable as a political commentator on TV. He has appeared on MSNBC, CNN, Fox Business, and other outlets. He is the go-to guy when they want a Republican millennial to balance their panel. However, Evan does not partake of the Republican Kool-Aid.
We got a president now that's going to upset the apple cart, that's going to take on the Washington crowd for too long, that's been controlling this country.
But that's not what they were talking about.
They all mentioned Evan's book, GOP GPS. I had to check it up on Amazon. It has mostly positive reviews, highly positive reviews. They were all 5 stars except for one. I was impressed that one of the reviewers is the famous Larry Sabato, Professor Sabato. He's a well-known pollster. And he indicates that Evan's book is a roadmap to Republicans if they want to recapture millennials and other hard-to-get voters. I'm honored to have Evan as a guest. Welcome, Evan.
Oh, thank you for having me, Will.
It's a pleasure. Evan, I mentioned that you were the Dashing Whippets, but I saw that it stated you were a lapsed runner. So what is your status of your running?
Well, I'd been dealing with shin splints for quite a while, and I would start to get back into running after taking some time off to deal with them and let it heal. And I found myself, I'd have a good run, and then I'd need 3 days to recover at minimum. And then there were days when I started to feel stronger and better, and I'd start getting my mileage up. And then I said to myself, you know what? I feel like doing a 1-mile recovery run the next day. And that would just always end it for me. So for now, I let it lapse. And then also my commentary career started taking off when I was having these issues, so I didn't have as much time. And one of my pet peeves about running is I would never run after I had shaved, because I would just get it would just burn my pores on my face from the sweat.
Wow.
So I always had to shave to go on air, so I wasn't about to go for a run after going on air.
I don't think I ever heard that excuse for not running. I've heard women don't run because of their hair, because it messes up their hair. But this is the first time I heard you can't run.
I would ordinarily get the runs in before I went and shaved. But because a lot of times, especially when you're first starting out doing TV commentary, they're having you on at 5 in the morning, which means you have to get up at 3 in the morning and get to the studio by 4 to do hair and makeup, and then you're going on at 5. And by the time I'm done, I'm already exhausted. I've still got makeup on my face that I can't get off. And you get that with the sweat and the makeup dripping in your eyes, and it just was never a pleasant experience.
Okay. A lot of the shows you do are live?
The vast majority of the shows I do are live. I do MSNBC all across there. I do all across Fox News and Fox Business. I do CNN. Right now, millennials or young voters 18 to 29, 23% of registered Republicans left the Republican Party between December 2015 and March 2017. More and more people do not feel that they have a place in the Republican Party. Millennials overall view President Trump and his approval rating with them is the worst among any generation. They're in the high teens to low 20s with 60 plus or 65 plus to 70% disapproval ratings. We're not growing the party in a perfect. It can be at all hours of the day, be it daytime, morning, prime time. I've done overnight coverage on breaking news events and major events going on, such as the Republican and Democratic national conventions.
You're in demand. You've been described as an expert on the millennials. You yourself are a millennial.
Yes.
In fact, I had to look up the definition of millennial. To my surprise, there isn't a standard definition. I like to use the Census Bureau definition, which is anybody born between 1981 and 2000 is a millennial. Do you have your own definition?
I go with Pew's definition right now, which is 1981 to 1997. If you were born in between those years, you're a millennial. And right now, millennials are the largest generation in the United States. We range from about 80 million to 92 million Americans. And we overtook baby boomers in the last few years as the biggest generation. We're also the largest sector of the workforce. We contribute every year $1 trillion to the economy and consumer spending. And the big thing with millennials and the Republican Party, which I'm a member of, is that millennials aren't connecting with the Republican Party. It's at a historic low for any generation. Only 1 in 5 millennials identify with the GOP or conservative values. And the rest of them say, it's not for us. And that was before Donald Trump. So when the Republican Party is going to advance in the future, we need to bring millennials into the fold.
One way we can actually do it, which Donald Trump, to his credit, has actually talked about, is by dealing with elder care. More and more women leave the workforce or take lower paying jobs so that they can take care of an older relative when they are going to pass or reaching the end of their life. And it takes $33 billion out of the economy annually. And that's not counting Social Security benefits that we would be collecting taxes on. And then once that relative passes away, they can't re-enter the workforce or move up, and that is a hindrance on women. So if we want to become the champion of women as a party, which we can be and should be, we've got to go out and address issues such as that. Democrats have been silent.
The book is GOP GPS. Evan Siegfried, thank you so much.
Because our base right now are rural voters and they are baby boomers. And those are both diminishing populations. The Census Bureau classifies 80% of the country as urban residents, and at the same time, you have the rural or baby boomers who are naturally passing away and reaching the end of their lives.
Wait a minute, don't give up on the baby boomers. They're picking up running and triathlons, they want to live longer.
Yes, still nonetheless, you have the white population in America decreases 2% every 4 years. The non-college educated white population in America decreases 4%. And those are the voters Republicans are relying on. Baby boomers in New York City are more likely to be voting for Democrats, but it's rural baby boomers that have sustained and given Republicans majorities in the House and Senate and the presidency.
Okay, in fact, you wrote a book. Your debut book. I love that all the shows comment that you wrote a book, I think it's called GOP GPS.
Yes.
And so what's the headline about this book?
The premise is we need, as a Republican Party, to change where we are without abandoning our conservative values, because there are a lot of stereotypes and falsehoods about us, that we have a war on women. Listen, we don't have a war on women. If we really had a war on women, you think we could manage it so well? Look at how terribly we manage Congress ourselves. We are inefficient. And there are other things that we're viewed as the party of the crusty old white guy, and we're racist and intolerant. When, if anything, if you look especially at younger Republicans, we're the exact opposite. We're incredibly tolerant. The issues that normally were wedge issues not 13, 14 years ago, such as marriage equality. Republicans were putting gay marriage bans on the ballot all throughout battleground states in 2004. Younger Republicans, even though they might not agree with marriage equality, believe in it and believe it is a right. They don't care. They take a more hands-off, live and let live approach. 76% of millennial Republicans believe in marriage equality. 67% of millennial Republicans who are evangelical Christians believe in marriage equality. And when you go, so we're taking the social issues and saying, and at the same time, millennials themselves are the most fiscally conservative generation since the Great Depression.
Talk to millennials on the issues that matter to them. Bernie Sanders was very successful in this, despite his solutions being completely wrong. What Bernie Sanders talked about was student debt. And the average millennial in 2015 who graduated from college graduated with an average of $35,000 in student debt. Republicans would just mock Bernie Sanders' solutions of, oh, we'll increase taxes and debt-free college. We should have been turning around and saying, well, wait a second. Why has the cost of college risen over the past decade? Well, if you look at some colleges, there's the University of Texas at Austin, who's now having luxury dorms that are better than most luxury apartment buildings in New York City. So we can talk about that, or how administrations have been blowing up their staff but not increasing the number of professors. So there's a lot of stuff we can do as Republicans and exercise fiscal conservatism.
We came of age, really, right in the Great Recession, and we really got hammered in terms of jobs. And that's why I took up running, because I couldn't afford other sports. We have over $1.3 trillion in student debt in the United States, which is almost double what the private credit card debt is in the United States.
Wow, that I didn't know. You're a fountain of information.
I had to research a lot.
The census, as you know, that's required by law every 10 years. I haven't seen much discussion about the census on TV because so much happens. In 2020, under the Trump administration, we're going to have to do the census again, as required by law. What do you think? Well, I believe it went back to the Commerce Department when Obama was running it. For some reason, if I recall, the census will be reporting to the chief of staff at the White House. I don't think the census today is going to be reporting to John Kelly, although that could change. So what is your take on the 2020 census? Do you think, for example, do you think the immigrants are going to totally run away from it? The undocumented immigrants?
I think it really depends upon what happens with immigration reform with that, because Trump came into office saying we only want to deport the criminal illegal immigrants. And there's no problem with that in my book. If you're a criminal and you've engaged in something that's not jaywalking as your criminal activity, something actually serious, then yeah, maybe we shouldn't have you here in this country. But law-abiding illegal immigrants, and then also people who are DACA, the dreamers, I have no personal problem with them. And the Trump administration said, we're not going to go for them. But all of a sudden, ICE and other enforcement agencies started rounding them up. And you're hearing heartbreaking stories of people who've lived here for 30 years. They're married to an American. Their kids are Americans. And they're told by ICE, oh, don't worry, because they came in to renew their status or to turn themselves in. They said, oh, no, come back next week. And then 2 days later, they bust down their door and kick them out of the country.
Yeah.
There was one instance of just recently where the wife tried to hug her husband as he was getting led away. And the agent said, if you touch him, you're interfering with a federal investigator and we will prosecute you. And she couldn't even give her husband a goodbye hug.
Yeah, it is very strange. Both sides of the aisle do very strange things, even though they say one thing. But you mentioned that you've written for the Wall Street Journal and New York Times. The one article that I found fascinating was in the Daily News, and I think it was titled, "I'm with her." Although you're a Republican, you came out strongly in support of Hillary. Hillary also came out with a book, I think it's called What Happened? So now with hindsight, why did she lose?
Well, first of all, I endorsed Hillary Clinton not because I was a fan. I actually do not like the Clintons. They represent many things that I despise, and their personal conduct as well has been very upsetting to me. And I did mention that in the endorsement of Hillary Clinton. But what I pointed out was that Donald Trump is temperamentally unfit for the office of the presidency. In February 2016, when I started realizing Trump was going to win the nomination, I joined together with a whole bunch of other Republicans who are on varying parts of the spectrum of conservatism. And we all said, we're never going to vote for this guy under any circumstances. And for me, it felt important right after he secured the nomination to stand up and say, no, this is not right. There are things wrong, and Donald Trump should not be president. At least with Hillary Clinton, we know what we're getting, and she's not going to have some sort of a mental breakdown and have a tweet out something completely nuts. And we're seeing that every day. The news cycle now is dominated by Donald Trump's tweets. And he's undone his own administration and actually harmed the U.S. diplomatically with tweets. But Hillary Clinton, I assumed she was going to win, like everybody else. All the polls were showing it. But in hindsight, I started to see a lot of things that should have been red flags. Take, for example, what the Clinton campaign was too overly reliant on data. They took turnout models that said that voters are going to turn out just like they did for the Obama campaigns. Oh. And they were assuming on that. So when Congresswoman Debbie Dingell of Michigan came to the Clinton campaign in early September and said, we need help in Michigan. We can't get people to knock on doors. Nobody's interested. You're going to lose here. The Clinton campaign brain trust went to the data and said, no, we've got Michigan in the bag by 10 points. And they didn't even visit Wisconsin. They visited once throughout the entire general election. Wisconsin, I believe it was a 10,000.
You're the Republican, right?
Yes.
You sound like a Democrat here.
No, I'm talking about political malpractice here.
I see. You got to study the other side, what they did right, what they did wrong.
Yes, you can offer critique. It's like you and I watch the Super Bowl or watch the New York City Marathon, and we can say this is why that runner was able to finish first and this one finished second.
Right.
Bad form. Well, Hillary Clinton, it was like her trying to run a marathon from the couch. That's what she basically did. She sat on the couch for months and months, ate chips, and then said, okay, now I'm going to go run a marathon and I'm going to try and break 3 hours. It's not going to happen. If you look at how close this election was, it was actually decided by 77,744 votes. And that was the margin of victory for Trump in the combined states of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin.
Michigan again.
Yep. And to give you an idea of what craziness this campaign engaged in, they decided for election night they were going to have a glass ceiling installed in the Javits Center. So when it was called for Hillary, this fake glass ceiling, which is a special kind of plastic that shatters and falls down on the audience, but it's designed so it won't be pointy and can't cut anyone.
Of course.
It falls down on the audience, and it's this symbolic moment. But they had to get insurance, and they had to pay for this special plastic. They spent $500,000. For $500,000, you could have picked up 50,000 votes in Wisconsin and Michigan easily by running radio ads and get out the vote operations. And they didn't. They chose to spend it on the glass ceiling.
Well, Hillary doesn't say that. She says she lost because of sexism and crusty old white men voted for Trump. Actually, Hillary says a lot of things.
But here's the thing. If you actually look at how younger voters voted, Bernie Sanders captured millennials particularly because he talked about issues that were important to them, such as student debt. His solutions, in my opinion, are wrong, but he was quite right to actually talk about these important issues. Hillary Clinton never did. She assumed and took the nomination for granted, and it was a bloody, bruising fight. And she turned off and has turned off a lot of younger minorities in this country. If you look at how young voters, which are voters 18 to 29, voted, and you do it by race, it stayed the same for Republicans. 37% voted for Mitt Romney in 2012, and 37% voted for Donald Trump.
Interesting.
But from Obama to Clinton, went from 60% Obama to just about 50% Clinton. More independent candidates got the votes of younger voters because they didn't like Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, and particularly African-American younger voters. They abandoned Hillary Clinton, and Hillary Clinton was needing those votes to win.
Yeah.
They either stayed home or voted for somebody else, and that's a big problem. Hillary Clinton was a flawed candidate. She turns people off. She's never been able to be authentic. The only time you see her authentic, it's a hidden camera thing where she's had a few drinks in her. And I know people who have spent time with her, and they say she's a wonderful woman, but it never translated.
Yeah. Something about being on camera. Interesting. Okay. What should Hillary be doing now?
Not saying anything.
Go away.
She needs to go away, to be honest with
Retire.
you, because the more she comes out, the more it fires up Republicans against Democrats.
Oh, okay. So she's good for the Republican Party every time she opens her mouth.
She and Nancy Pelosi are the two biggest gifts to the
Okay.
Republican Party right
All right.
now.
Okay. So what's your prediction on the midterms coming up? Usually the party in power loses seats. Are they going to lose more than normal?
Here's what's been playing out. The economy is very good and very strong, and people are very happy with it. In the 2018 midterms, I don't think the economy is going to be as big a factor. Yes, we are seeing numbers on tax reform start to go up because the tax reform package that was passed was wholly unpopular. But people are starting to realize now that they're getting bonuses from all their companies and they're seeing their paychecks start to increase, even by a little bit. They're saying, it's not so bad. But also it's part of the Democratic fault because the Democrats during the legislation had the better messaging and Republicans were terrible.
Yeah.
And now it's flipped. When Nancy Pelosi made a strategic error.
In terms of the bonus that corporate America received versus the crumbs that they are giving to workers to kind of put the schmooze on is so pathetic. It's so pathetic. I think it's insignificant.
Crumbs. $1,000 is a lot of money to the
right.
vast majority of Americans.
Yep.
And when you hear that, it sounds out of touch. And Republicans, it was a gift, and we're going to try and use that in the midterms.
Okay.
That being said, I do think Republicans come very close to losing the majority in the House, if not outright losing it.
Okay.
But we keep the Senate.
Okay. The future's hard to predict, but if the Democrats take over the majority, the fear is, or the expectation is, they would try to impeach President Trump. I guess that also depends if Moller ever comes out with his findings. What is your prediction on the Moller findings?
Well, I think Mueller will release his findings a couple of weeks after he actually interviews with Trump. If he were to interview with the president today, I think we'd have the findings by the Ides of March. Robert Mueller does not like being stagnant. He always likes to be in full motion. And investigations like this one normally take years. But Mueller has assembled a team who, forgetting all of the attacks on their backgrounds by my party, or some members of my party, they are the best team you want.
The Bulldogs. Yeah.
They know exactly what they're doing. They've done high-profile cases against the mob, terrorists, white-collar criminals. Each member of this team has specialties that blow you away.
Okay, so you're of the opinion, since Moller wants to interview Trump near the end, that he just needs one more. So Trump's lawyer says, don't do it. You're going to regret it. Some other people say, do it, but do it like, I forget which president only spoke for 1 hour.
That was George W. Bush to the 9/11 Commission. That wasn't a criminal investigation.
So some are saying, go and talk to Moller because President Trump says he wants to do it.
He said those things under oath. Would you be willing to speak under oath to give your version of those events?
100%.
So if Robert Mueller wanted to speak with you about that,
I would be glad to
him?
tell him exactly what I just told you, Joe.
And when you talk to the FBI, it doesn't matter whether you're on oath or not. If you lie, you're toast. And of course, President Trump doesn't know the difference between a lie and the truth. So he's going to get caught at something. It sounds like you would like to see him go in front of Moller. Do you think there should be some ground rules?
If I were a lawyer advising President Trump, I would tell him not to do this interview because President Trump is his own worst enemy. But the real part of me wants this interview. There should be no ground rules. I don't think the President of the United States should be subject to special treatment just because of the office they're in. Yes, they can't get sued in state court for things because of being president, and you'd be dragged all across the country having to give depositions. And there's so many lawsuits filed against presidents that are frivolous, like they are secretly sending me subliminal signals through my microwave. I've seen those lawsuits. I used to work in the Brooklyn federal courts. But then there are actual lawsuits saying, the travel ban, for example. Those are lawsuits where it's issues of constitutionality. But those are all federal suits. State court suits have to wait until the president is no longer in office. But when it's a criminal matter and you're being interviewed for that, I don't think you can limit it. I don't think you can do that for any other American. And I know that his lawyers are trying to limit his exposure. They're saying, well, why don't we do an hour? Or we're happy to answer questions, but submit them in written form and we'll give you written answers. That's not Donald Trump answering if it's a written form.
That's right.
And I think the president, it would actually be a net positive for him. Let's pretend for a second that Mueller comes out and says nothing untoward happened. It just looks really bad, and he lays it out in a way that the majority of the American public says, okay, we buy it. That would actually be good for Trump, that he actually went out and testified to Mueller. And it shows he doesn't have anything to hide, and it would help him maybe bring up his abysmal poll numbers. But at the same time, he puts himself at great jeopardy. And it's clear Mueller's looking at obstruction of justice. And if he goes in and he twists his words.
I like, I think it was Lindsey Graham who says the Trump can't even collude with his own administration, that there's no way he colluded with the Russians. Personally, I don't think there's anything there, but I do agree with the lawyers. That's why they're lawyers, and that if he goes in front of Moller with no restrictions, he's going to lose. They're going to get him on something. It may not be on collusion, it may be on his tax returns, because he has no limitation. In fact, there's no crime that's been stated. What is the purpose of the Mueller administration, of the Mueller investigation?
Well, the big thing with Mueller is they're looking at if the Trump campaign got the hacked emails beforehand from another entity, that's receipt of stolen goods. And that gets them into extremely hot water. And if there were any promises made. The other thing is it's the obstruction of justice from his time in office, telling James Comey to go or to drop the investigation against Flynn, firing James Comey because he didn't like the Russia investigation. That is actual obstruction of justice. Remember, presidents are subject to the law. They cannot exceed it.
Well, to my point, he stated what was on his mind about why he fired Comey. He has every right to fire Comey, they say, and he has every right to talk to the Russians. It's a very gray area here. So my opinion is there is nothing there with the Russian collusion. I don't know whether he should speak to Moller or not. I usually go with the professionals, but this is a political situation, so it'll be interesting, be very interesting. Now, this is a very unusual, got to run. We've never done political commentary to this extent. So I want to bring back sports into it. For example, when Nixon was president, he went to China through one of the mechanisms was sports, the ping pong diplomacy, they call it. They got the two teams together to play. The next thing you know, Kissinger is arranging a meeting with President Nixon, with the Chinese, and the Chinese are now, a world power. Well, in some circles, respected. Right now, North Korea and South Korea are playing hockey together. Is there a parallel, in your opinion?
On the surface, yes, but you have to look at the overall situation in Pyeongchang and what's going on with North Korea itself. North Korea knows that South Korea's leader is much more amenable to reunification and having friendlier relations with North Korea than the United States, Japan, Russia, or China are. And so they're trying to drive a wedge between South Korea and all the other countries that have a heavy investment in it, particularly the United States. So when you see this happening, it's not because there's going to be some sort of diplomatic breakthrough. It's about a strategic chess move. North Korea is a regime that brutally represses its people. 24 million North Koreans live in extreme poverty and starvation. There are concentration camps which they're put into. It's a society that is geared toward one thing, taking care of the leader in any way he sees fit. They have no real food sources. If they say anything bad about the leader, they're put in a concentration camp. You're supposed to inform on your own parents and your own children and your brothers and sisters. And if you do that, they will take them away and most likely execute them. This is a brutal, repressive regime with multiple human rights abuses and probably the worst on the planet. And I think President Trump, on his policy for getting North Korea off or to walk back from the abyss, and has actually been very good, taking out the fire and fury comments, which have not helped. The policy itself, he's started implementing sanctions not on North Korea, but on the Chinese entities and other entities that have been the lifeblood to North Koreans. And that actually works in starving them of everything. They also have to pressure South Korea because South Korea also gives aid to North Korea. If you cut off North Korea completely, the regime, and it's only the leadership who has to feel the sanctions because they don't impact the everyday lives of the people. When the leadership feels them, then they start having talks about a coup, which happened in the late 90s, but until the South Koreans gave aid.
It's a difficult thing. The Chinese don't want the North Koreans to completely falter because they know their people will go into China.
The Chinese also don't want a unified North Korea because they think it would be a big foothold for the United States.
But here's the bugaboo. The North Koreans are not going to give up the nuclear weapons. They're not.
No. Kim Jong-un has staked his entire legitimacy on it.
And Obama administrators, or people that were in the Obama administration, have said we have to simply go into containment mode, except, and that's a big bugaboo to the Trump. No, we cannot accept. North Korea is not going to give up their nukes. I can completely sympathize with South Korea. Any kind of war there, millions
Within
will
the
die.
first hour, 500,000 people in Seoul would be dead. And that's not from nuclear weapons. That's from the artillery.
That's right. So South Korea is in a bad position. In your opinion, should we accept a nuclear North Korea?
No. We have to find a way to give or find a bigger reward for Kim Jong-un, something that he wants more than nuclear weapons. He, again, has staked his entire legitimacy on nuclear weapons, but he wants to know that he's going to be safe and in power. So if we can find a way to negotiate a disarmament and a promise of we will not invade, we will not overthrow you, and won't support any alternatives, that's one way. The other way is you get, through the sanctions, the upper echelons to revolt and launch a coup against Kim Jong-un. And you get somebody who's a little bit more reasonable and willing to talk to the West and talk about disarmament. You can get that in exchange for a ton of food and a ton of economic aid. The second North Korea disarms you'd see a flood of Western, particularly U.S. aid going in there and humanitarian help. Remember, Americans, I think our strength is our compassion. And we do want to be compassionate towards them. Over this past weekend, you saw several of the media talking about Kim Jong-un's sister, Kim Yo-jong, and how great she was. Yeah. And it was horrifying because this woman has participated in putting people in concentration camps, had people executed. She presides over this regime with her brother. And to lionize her like that was absolutely disgusting to me. So one good friend of mine, she works with a charity called Liberty in North Korea, which raises money to help North Korean refugees who flee the country. And she raised in an hour $31,000 just from tweeting it out and saying, hey, you know what? If you're angry about the way the media is praising Kim Yo-jong, why don't you turn that anger into something good? And I thought that was a really wonderful and positive thing because you can help a North Korean escape such brutality just by a small donation. And even $5 goes a long way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But the big picture is, they say North Korea is only within months of perfecting that weapon that could hit us, the intercontinental ballistic missile, that goes through the atmosphere. Once they prove that, is that a different ballgame?
It depends upon the national security apparatus around the president and what the president's mindset is. Any sort of military action, surgical strike, et cetera, would not get all of the nuclear weapons in the first bit. The North Koreans are putting them deep into mountains, and while we have the bunker buster bombs and there's the mother of all bombs, which is the biggest bomb or conventional bomb in the American arsenal, I think it costs $20 million per bomb. It's so vast. There's no guarantee you'd get them.
Yeah.
Guam is absolutely at risk. You've got Hawaii, you've got the West Coast, and then you have our allies, particularly South Korea. And as I said, Seoul, within the first hour, 500,000 people.
Yeah.
Up to 30,000 of them are American, and they're there because they're military families.
That's right. All right. This is fascinating. Not that it's reassuring. So what keeps you up at night when you're a political commentator?
My dog, actually. It's okay. It's time to play. Actually, my dog is the one who tries to get me to go to bed at night. I'm working on my second book now, and I have strange writing habits because sometimes inspiration will strike at 1 a.m, and I'm going to start banging out whatever words I can get there because I want to get to 70,000 to 100,000 words and put it out for a publisher to buy. But my dog is the one who's just sort of like, come on, turn out the lights.
Oh, good for him. Make sure you take care of yourself. Of course, he needs his exercise, and that's where you get your exercise.
Oh, he gets his exercise daily. He goes to the dog run and goes all around. Now, here's the thing. He's an Australian Shepherd, and he and I run together. We've done the doggy dash, which was a lot of fun, but it was on a terribly hot day, so I didn't want to push him too hard. You do, the course was the 72nd Street transverse on the West Drive going clockwise up to past Harlem Hill. And then you had at the 2.5 mile part, a mandatory vet check where they wanted to take the dog's temperature to make sure they weren't overheating.
Great.
And it was wonderful, except for Rowdy when they took his temperature. He was not a big fan of that.
Oh, they put it up his butt?
Oh, he was not a big fan. He just looked at me like, what is, it's hot, but it's not that hot.
But it was for his own good. Anyway,
I would test. I have no problem injuring myself on a run. I would be heartbroken if I injured my dog.
Yeah.
That would destroy me. Okay. But he and I went and we finished, and you finished where the New York City Triathlon finishes, and they give Rowdy a medal. They gave me a medal. He has his medal still.
Oh, I saw some of the photos, and it looks like he picked up a few fans. I saw some of the other Dashing Whippets wanted to take their
Juan
photos.
Becerra, who was at the finish line and coincidentally finished the triathlon at the same time we were finishing. And it was a great deal of fun. But because he's a high-energy dog, he and I would run together. And forgetting the shin splint stuff, I would be doing, say, hill repeats on Cat Hill. And, he'd keep up when we're going up the hill at a fast pace, and then we do a light jog back down, except Rowdy, he takes a perverse pleasure in torturing me. He likes to sprint the downhills. And when you're trying to recover from doing hill repeats, it's not a good idea. I just look at him and I say, what's your problem? And he looks back over his shoulder at me with this evil eye and this smile of just perverse pleasure at my discomfort. But he's a wonderful dog. He's great to run with. He's very fast. One of my good friends who's also a Dashing Whippet, his name is Greg Pezzolano, and he's in love with Greg. And one day last May, I was running along the West Side Highway, and I hear this guy come up behind me and say, "Oh, you're looking good." And it's Greg. Rowdy sees him, starts chasing after him. But I was at about 1/10 of a mile from my turnaround point. And Rowdy's going crazy. So we hit the turnaround and he sort of calms down. And then Greg hit his turnaround point. He's much faster than I am. And goes past us. For the last 1.5 miles, Rowdy's sprinting after him. And, I'm doing 8-minute miles, and then all of a sudden I'm doing 6:30, and I'm trying to keep
jump.
So the dog, he's fast. It's the handler who's not so fast anymore.
Well, that's great. So how long have you had Rowdy?
I've had Rowdy since he was 8 weeks old, and that was June of 2014. He turns 4 on tax day this year.
Tax day. So where did you find him?
I got him from a breeder in Pennsylvania. I interviewed a lot of breeders and said, I want a dog that can be active and run with me, but at the same time has an off switch and is smart and affectionate.
I like that off switch. So he goes to bed at night and he's out.
He can sleep until 11 in the morning. It's wonderful.
Wonderful. He's not like a baby. That's great. Now, not too many single people have dogs in New York City. It's always tough to make sure they get exercise and so forth. But somehow you manage it.
Yeah, I work from home, so that also helps. So in addition to the commentary, I do consulting, where I provide public affairs consulting for my clients, such as governmental facing problems, how to overcome these obstacles. It's a moral issue, and nobody who does that or abuses anybody should have a place in government. But look what John Kelly's tenure, what has happened. He came out and he said, well, the Civil War happened because we couldn't compromise. And that was seen as a pretty racist statement because you don't compromise on human bondage. And then the next time he attacks Frederica Wilson in racist undertones. And then this week, some of the Dreamers were too lazy to get off their couches and register. This is a chief of staff who I love that he served and the service he did as a Marine, and he has sacrificed for this country, but I have lost all confidence in him as chief of staff. He's becoming a distraction. He says things that are absolutely outrageous, and then he does things in the case of Rob Porter that are morally despicable. Why is John Kelly White House chief of staff now after repeated mistakes?
You have a fascinating career. Let's go back to the beginning then. Usually I start my show with this question. Tell us where you were born and something about your childhood, Evan.
Well, I grew up here in New York City, on the Upper West Side of all places, and I probably am now the most conservative person to ever come out of the Upper West Side of New York.
Could be.
And it's a wonderful badge of honor. I went to school here in grade school, and then I went away to boarding school at 2 schools, one called Greenwood and then another called Kent's Hill. The first in Vermont and the other in Maine.
Okay.
I came back because after 6 years of dorm life, I said, I'm done. I said, NYU, Fordham, or Columbia, whichever one takes me first. So I went to Fordham Lincoln Center and had a great time.
This is for college or graduate school?
For undergrad.
Undergrad.
I do not have any sort of advanced degree other than a BA.
Yeah, and what was the degree?
Political science.
Oh,
I come
makes
from a
sense.
family of lawyers, and I never thought I'd be getting into politics, to be honest with you. I took an internship in the New York City DA's office in between my junior and senior year of high school. And
Morgenstern?
Morgenthau in his office, in the Special Narcotics Prosecutor's office.
Oh.
And you had to, as part of the internship, watch one trial. And you get to pick the trial. So I picked the murder trial, thinking it's going to be like Law and Order. It was the most boring thing I've ever seen. And I said, I don't want to be a lawyer. Didn't know what I wanted to do. And I said, well, I kind of like politics, so I guess I'll major in political science. Didn't know what I was doing. Then my senior year at Fordham, they offered a program, which is sadly now defunct, where you could go and work for the United Nations for the year. And I took night classes at the same time. So I worked at the UN in the press secretary's office. And that turned me on to political communications, or more policy communications, I should say. And I said, okay, this is fun, but I hadn't set my heart on it. And I bumped into a reporter about 2 weeks after I graduated from Fordham. And he said, how are you? What are you doing? And I said, well, I don't want to go into finance. I don't want to be a lawyer. I don't know what to do. And he said, you should move to D.C. and go work on Capitol Hill. So I did. I worked in the U.S. Senate for Senator Bill Nelson of Florida.
How old were you, about 21, 22?
I was 22. And I worked in his press office. And, it's a very entry-level job, but you learn a lot of the ropes. You're talking about important policy legislation. You're communicating it to the public and putting forward a good face for the senator. And I was very lucky in that I got to work for a man, even though he was a Democrat, and I at the time was a Democrat, he was, and he's still there, he's probably one of the people who are there for the right reasons.
Okay.
He's not flashy, doesn't care about the pomp and circumstance. He cares about going and doing a good job that delivers results.
So what happened that he became a Republican?
Well, I worked for Rudy Giuliani's presidential campaign.
2008?
The 2008 presidential campaign.
What, that lasted like, what, a year?
About 15 months, from January 2007 until
I remember
early
that.
March,
He was on
late
top
February.
of the heap for a while. Everybody was in shock.
Well, everybody was. And I think it was a party that was in an identity crisis, especially in the post-Bush era. And you're still seeing that identity crisis play out today. And that's partially why we have Donald Trump as the president. But I worked for that campaign. And after, you're working 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, plus getting an hour and a half to 2 hours of sleep a night. And while that's happening, I was one of the designated overnight press people. So I'd be fielding the initial press calls to screen them out for the people who would go on record and answer the questions. So I'd get calls from the press in other time zones, in Europe and Asia. And it's 3 a.m. and I just want to say, please don't call me. I just need my hour of sleep.
My gosh, were we doing any running at that time?
No, I hadn't gotten into running at that point. But they say, people ask me, what is it like working on a campaign, especially a presidential one? Think of it as running a marathon, but doing it at a sprinter's pace. And the sprint you're running is the 100-meter dash. That's how physically debilitating it is. Most people get very sick. You gain a lot of weight. Or once a campaign ends, your immune system just crashes. Because you've been under so much stress. And it's physical, it's mental, it's emotional, and it just destroys you. So after that, I said, I got to just do a 9-to-5 job. And I got a job in the clerk's office at the Brooklyn Federal Court, where this is where my running comes into play. I met a guy who was recruited for the Dashing Whippets named Jeremy Adler. And Jeremy was a clerk for a judge that I was very close with. Judge David Traeger. And Jeremy and I became friends. And he told me one day that the night before he had gone out and he went to the New York Roadrunners track series. And he had done a couple of events and he won them all. And
he's quite fast.
Yeah, but I didn't know that at the time. I just said, oh, okay.
He won them all. That was a big club.
Well, I was like, I guess I could go and do it and win too. And he said, do you run? I said, no, I play hockey. And he said, you should try running. And he and I got much closer as Judge Traeger, he got prostate cancer and quickly passed away. But he and I got much closer. And part of that therapy was Jeremy took me under his wing and started running with me and teaching me the fundamentals. And it was one of the best things that anybody has done for me. And at the time, Jeremy was an unattached runner. And Matthew Wong of the Dashing Whippets, who has his, who spends his days looking up runners' results and contacting them on Facebook and probably being reported as spam 50% of the time, he reached out to Jeremy and said, you're fast. We need a fast runner. Jeremy's time, he ran the Boston Marathon about 6-7 years ago in 2:27. So yeah, he's a little bit of a fast guy.
That's close to elite.
Yeah, he said to me, it was either go into the law and become a lawyer or a professional runner. And I chose the law. And I said, why do you want to be a glutton for punishment? But he brought me aboard on the Dashing Whippets. So Matt Wong, I'd never really run a race. Matt Wong was like, I haven't seen your times. I can't find you on Athlinks. He assumed I was just as fast as Jeremy. So he's sending me all these things, saying, come out and do this. And then I run a race, and he realizes, no, okay, I've made a huge mistake. But Matt is a good friend to this day. And because of Jeremy Adler being recruited by Matt Wong and Jeremy teaching me about running, the Whippets were where I found my home. It was a very open and accepting. It didn't matter what your pace was. And it still doesn't. You could be a 5-minute miler to a 20-minute miler. Everybody's going to be there and cheer for you. I've met some of the best people who are some of my closest friends in life as a result of it. I have gotten great fitness. And at the same time, it helps keep me grounded because I only got into commentary in 2015, and it was because of Donald Trump. And I stood up and I said, I think he's bad for the Republican Party. And it just snowballed from there. And I've seen a lot of people start to go on TV and develop a huge ego. And I have friends like Jeremy and Greg Pezzolano and Matt Wong and Henrietta Aitken and Caitlin Jones, Megan Jones. You go through Patricia Torona, Juan Becerra. Every single one of the people I meet on the Whippets, they keep me grounded. They don't care. They're like, okay, that's cool, you're on TV, but you're being a jerk or something like that. They have no problem because they knew me before, and I like that. And that's a powerful thing because you need to have somebody who can say to you, you know,
you're But actually, I see many of the YouTube because you take the trouble of extracting your performances.
Only its key performances.
And you're consistent, I noticed. But I was also struck that you enunciate very well. You got presence. So did you get that from your parents because they were lawyers and had to be able to present themselves, to present an argument?
Well, I think you just insulted my mom by calling her a lawyer. My dad is a lawyer. My late uncle was a lawyer. My grandfather was a lawyer. I have a cousin who's a lawyer.
So what happened to your mom?
She had brains. But I got it because my parents told me, you know, no matter what you're communicating, you need to communicate it well. And the schools I went to also had that philosophy. And I've said, all right, if I'm going to go on TV and argue or make a point, I need to know what I'm going to say. So what generally happens and what people don't know is when we go on TV, we don't know until about an hour or two before what the topics are. So they send you the topics and they send you some suggested reading. It's normally related to whatever's going on in the news.
Just read the tweets from the hour before. Okay, it's going to be that.
But you also have to pick up stats. So what one network does is they require you to send in talking points before you go on air so the host knows how to handle and what questions to ask and what you're going to be saying. They don't want to have a guest come on and say something completely crazy and out of left field that they have no idea how to handle.
Secret Service itself is actually very angry. You could see it in the statement they put out after Jay Sekulow said, well, they were the ones who dropped the ball. They said, no, we were not responsible for screening, and Donald Trump Jr. didn't even have protection at that time. The Secret Service is also not chaperoned to any of these meetings. Remember, John Wayne Gacy met Rosalind Carter, and the Secret Service didn't even screen that out.
That was a random observation, but thank you for that.
And so that network had me on a great deal early on, and that sort of trained my mind. So I would always write out talking points. And then it got to the point where I could just do it in my head. And so I always keep sort of, when I go on air, I take 3 things I want to say. And this is the thrust of the argument. Here are some statistics behind it. And then one other thing. And if you can throw in a joke, do so.
Jokes could be dangerous.
Jokes are wonderful.
Really? Many people have fallen because the joke has been taken the wrong way.
Well, you need to deliver them well. That's the key. I always like to go out and go to 2 or 3 friends who I can sort of crowd test it with first.
Oh, okay.
There are some jokes that come up where I just say it completely off the cuff and it worked. And there are other ones where they're so sophisticated that it doesn't translate for everybody else on set. It goes right over their heads.
Oh,
but
like
the viewers
baseball.
are saying, oh, I have one joke that is actually a recurring joke that only Dashing Whippets would know about, which is whenever I talk about immigration, I talk about how we approach immigration by viewing all immigrants as being from Latino or Hispanic countries, and that's not true, and that there are other immigrants. And I always say think of a guy from Finland. Let's call him Jyrki from Finland. Did try and enter the United States. He has a PhD in political science. He wanted to become a college professor, and he completely lost the lottery every time. And that's after Jyrki Ruomäki, who a former Whippet who's back in Finland. He's from there. He's one of my favorite people ever. And I always talk about, think of the plight of the immigrant Jyrki from Finland. And, you know, I've been tempted to say he's probably a bad guy and we should build a wall around Finland. But I don't think people would, that's too deep in the joke.
That's right.
But Whippets see that and think it's a really funny inside joke. Other jokes I've made, I've talked about how the administration early on had a competence gap. And I said, you know, the administration in Veep was far more competent than these guys. And that played well.
The sitcom with
Julia Louis-Dreyfus, which is the most accurate portrayal of the political world that I've ever seen.
Really?
The way I phrase it is, people want to speak like Aaron Sorkin writes. They think they're in House of Cards, but they really are in Veep. I know the Jonas, I know the Dans, I know the Garys. I mean, every single character is a person I've actually come across in real life. People are trying for those really cutting insults. They're just not as good. Veep is the most accurate I've ever seen. It's a documentary as far as I'm concerned.
And the actress won the Emmys like 8 times in a row. She owns that part.
She's fantastic.
And she's recovering from breast cancer.
Yeah.
It's an amazing. I haven't seen that show. I've seen House of Cards, but I haven't caught Veep. So
I would highly recommend it.
Okay. On a closing note, any final commentary?
Well, I think that what's great about running is that it actually can bridge the partisan divide. And especially in this era where Republicans and Democrats, if you try and cooperate, the far right and the far left bases will go nuts. And take Mike Huckabee. He himself was significantly overweight as governor of Arkansas. And he developed, I think it was type 2 diabetes. And his doctor said to him, you need to make major lifestyle changes. And he took up running. And he wound up running the Little Rock Marathon. And he lost an incredible amount of weight. And he started teaming up with Democrats, far left Democrats, on issues of health, because we do have an obesity crisis here. And I think when you get Democrats and Republicans in a room and you get them to realize what we have in common, we'll see there's a lot more that unites us than divides us. And when you have Mike Huckabee reaching out, and he's a very far right guy, reaching out to people on the far left and saying, hey, we got to get kids active. Heck, we got to get adults active. And I think that there's more that you can do there. We saw it at the congressional baseball game last spring after Steve Scalise was shot. But that still goes on. And it has been going on for years. They have the congressional hockey game, the congressional basketball game. I think that in order to forge more bipartisanship, we need to have people engaging in sports and seeing the good in them. So a good way to actually start, even if it's just a simple bill that nobody would get upset by, we could start offering tax credits for shoe companies that donate, or for every pair that is bought, they'll donate another pair to a school, especially in an underprivileged neighborhood. Because I grew up, or I started playing ice hockey in high school, and that's not an inexpensive sport.
Right.
But it is inexpensive to get a pair of running shoes. You can run, and you can put on a race on your own, theoretically, for kids. And New York Roadrunners does a great job reaching out to kids, and they have the right idea. And I'm sure there are other organizations all across the country who do that. And I think that if we can get lawmakers behind that, of both sides of the aisle, maybe that'll be the spark that works. Otherwise, I just say we lock them in a room and don't let them out.
I think locking them in a room and don't letting them out would be...
I think they call that Thunderdome. Two parties enter, one party leaves.
The Mel Gibson movies?
Yes.
So you must watch a lot of movies.
I try and keep up on the pop culture, not so much on movies anymore.
Well, you got to read a ton of papers. You must read the Daily, not the Daily, everything, every paper.
I don't read them cover to cover. I go out and I actually use Twitter as my news feed. I follow people who are either pundits, operatives, reporters, because you can get the breaking news as it happens and the good analysis and the key points. I read a lot of polls. Just before I came in, there was a poll from Monmouth University about a special election in Pennsylvania's 18th congressional district. And I was reading the polls, and it's not just 56% of the voters say they're going to vote for this guy and 30% for the other guy. I go out and I read what are called the crosstabs, which are the very fine details, which are they break it down by ethnicity and age group and gender.
That sounds interesting. I could see some people be turned off by, oh my gosh, there's too much details and you really got to, I mean, if you want to be the top of your profession like you are, you've got to be able to enjoy, go deep as much as possible behind the numbers rather than the surface. It's an interesting career you have. I wish you continue success. We're looking forward on your next book and hopefully more adventures of Rowdy and Evan.
Yes, and I think that Rowdy is going to be the official mascot of the Dashing Whippets because...
he's not a whippet. That's controversy right there.
That's breedism right there. You're discriminating against my dog right now. But I think that it would be healthy if the Dashing Whippets board were to adopt him as the official mascot because he actually was a model before I even got into things.
On that note, Rowdy the model, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you, Will.
Would you, as a millennial, Evan, get paid in cryptocurrency? Would you take that bargain?
I would much rather my employer light my money on fire in front of me. I don't think cryptocurrency is currently a safe bet for millennials. Stick with the standard currency and ask for something else like, you know, health insurance or something along those lines.
Millennials are cutting the cord, but it's not the TV cord. There's a study that shows that millennials are staying on their family phone plans. Now, you know, this is now an older generation. 21% of millennials say their parents are picking up the cell phone tab because they have no other financial option. Millennials are staying on their family phone plans. Some parents are saying it's cheaper, we're getting money from our kids. Some parents are saying we're not getting anything, and they're just sponging off of us. What do you say?
I mean, my ancestors didn't travel to this country so that I could live in my parents' basement, eat, you know, popcorn and have my cell phone paid for. I think it's enabling. I think it's a problem, and I think that it shouldn't be done.
But that's one of the criticisms, Evan, of the generation.
I think what Jason just said is playing to the stereotype of millennials as this lazy, entitled generation. I am a millennial. I own my own business. I own my own home. But I'm still on my parents' cell phone plan. I pay them. Why? Because actually I'm grandfathered in and I have unlimited data. And it's a better deal than what I could get on my own. At the same time, a lot of millennials aren't having their own cell phone plans because they can't afford it. And it goes back to the issue of what we talked about earlier in the show, student debt. We're delaying independence in our own lives because we are crippled with debt. And another way to save money is to stay on your parents' cell phone.